We have two instructionals for guard retention. There is the under and around the legs instructional, and there is the through the legs and close range instructional. So obviously there are some common themes throughout guard retention that apply whether you're going through the legs or around the legs. In this first chapter, we actually made a common chapter that is applicable for both instructionals. So both of the instructions will have this first chapter you're about to watch now. After that, each of the instructionals also has about 8 hours of unique content. So enjoy. This instructional is on guard retention, and to cover this topic, it's an extremely important topic. In fact, probably what I think is the most important topic to cover. And to do this, I brought my friend and training partner, Ari Tabak. Did I say it right?
Yeah, you got it right.
All right. Ari has, I've rolled with a lot of really high-level people throughout my career, and Ari has some of the best guard retention I've experienced. I felt the frustration of trying to pass his guard. Obviously, guard retention is something I've worked on myself too, but I really wanted to delve into the mind of Ari and kind of work some of his system into my game. And I think sort of by doing that, we've come to a very good understanding. Or I think both of us have improved our guard retention just by going through this process. So we're really excited to share this with you.
Hey guys, my name's Ari Tabak. I'm a black belt under Cicero Costa. I'm currently based in Melbourne, training between Absolute MMA with Lachlan Giles and at Immersion Mixed Martial Arts with Li Ting and David Marinakis. So a big part of my game is based around my guard. And while I have very separate attacks and approaches with my guard game, I place a heavy emphasis on guard retention. Over the years, I've developed quite a sound approach to my guard retention, which I feel works very well for me. I'd first like to mention a lot of the grapplers that have influenced me, especially my guard retention over the years, that mainly being the Miyao brothers, Murillo Santana, and Levi Jones-Leary.
So this instructional is really comprehensive. There's a lot of detail. We're aiming it really for an advanced level, as if you've been training a long time, you understand some parts of guard retention, and we're trying to kind of make it so you become an expert at it. So this might be difficult if you're new to guard retention. I can see it being, I can see you watching this and feeling a bit overwhelmed, especially if you just try to watch it through in one, like you're watching a movie and watch it all in a row and try to remember all the details. It will not work that way. Okay, so the first thing I would say is try to watch our first chapter, which is on the main concepts that we want to cover that kind of apply throughout guard retention. And just spend a bit of time getting used to using those in training and practice them and drill them and work those concepts first. Then you can go on to individual sections and try to expand on it from there. The best way to watch this is online because we have clickable links. If you watch it through the Fanatics website, you can scroll, look for the thing that you're having trouble with, click on that and find it and watch that video. If you try to just watch it, a full 2-hour video on, for example, through the legs passing, that's going to be hard to remember all the details. But if you have a specific thing that you're troubleshooting and looking to work through, that's how we want you to use this instructional. So make sure you're using it that way. Another important thing to point out is this is what myself and Ari believe is the best form of guard retention. So this is what the best guys are doing. Now, the learning curve for this, I think, is quite steep. I think for most people, when you start trying, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to stop doing a lot of things that you've probably been taught. I know I had to do the same when I learned this. And you're going to have to start trying to do new things, which means you're probably going to really suck at it at first. And it's going to take a long time. I would think of this as at the very minimum, a 6-month project. Probably for most people, a 1 to 2 year project of working on eventually having excellent guard retention. But I can guarantee you, if you stick to what we're doing here, it is the best way to approach guard retention, and in the long run you'll have a huge payoff if you stick with it and make sure you learn these techniques. Now on that, we are focusing on outside leg positioning. We'll talk a little bit about why we're focusing on outside leg positioning later, but we're assuming that is the style of guard that you like to play. Even if you like to play inside leg positioning, you will get a lot out of this instructional in the ability to retain and prevent certain types of passes, but this is really going to favor you if you have your offensive guards using outside leg positioning as well. Now, both Ari and I talk at a pace that means we get to say exactly what we want to say. But sometimes we speak maybe slower than we could. So a good thing you can do is actually put this on 1.5 speed. If you feel like you're getting the general gist and you want to sped up, you should still be able to follow the concepts for the most of it. So you can watch it at 1.5 speed if you feel like, given the volume of material we're covering, if you're kind of browsing through and just trying to get the general idea, I think that's a good idea to do. So guard retention can be a hard thing to learn. I think it does take a while to learn for two main reasons. One is the speed at which things happen. There's a lot of timing involved, and things are happening very quickly, especially from these at a distance range, like people are moving left, right, clearing your grip, and it just takes a long time to learn the timing for that. The other reason is because you're working retention, it's a bit different to, like, if I teach a guard or a technique where you're being offensive, it's usually a clear direction that you're going, like, I want to grab the leg and I want to do this. So everything's kind of funneled. And it's almost the opposite in guard retention, where it's like they can go anywhere. They can go left, right, up, down, forward, back, and you have to be ready for all of them. So you're actually almost like broadening out as opposed to trying to narrow it down. And that does make it more difficult to learn. But again, it's such an important skill that you're going to have to put in the time to do it. All right, guys, one really important thing is don't pirate this content. This is how we make a living, us in jiu-jitsu, myself and Ari. We put a lot of time into working this content and bringing our best content. We don't hide anything. We put everything forward. So we appreciate that you guys are helping out and getting this the proper way to support us. You should never get your guard passed. That's the mindset we want you to have. Obviously, that's not going to be true, but that's the mindset we want you to have in your training. Like, if you get your guard passed, I want you to almost consider that as bad as being submitted. It's a true sign. If you get your guard passed, it's a true sign that your opponent was more skillful than you. The amount of steps they have to go through to pass your guard is a lot. You have to make a lot of mistakes in a row, or they have to win a lot of battles in a row to have your guard passed. So we want you to go home fuming and reviewing our instructional and trying to fix the mistake that you have. I know that's like out of anything in training, if someone passes my guard, I'm usually to be honest, I'm probably more annoyed at that sometimes than being submitted by, especially if I'm submitted. Obviously they got a control position submitted me, then I'm obviously just as annoyed, if not more. But if they get a lucky submission out of nowhere, or kind of a frantic
like one from guard or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, something like that doesn't bother me as much as having my guard passed, because when I get my guard passed, I know that I made a series of errors in a row that were capitalized on that I really shouldn't have allowed to happen. And just on that, there are quite a few competitors that we can think of that we have never seen have their guard passed in competition before. So that's the level you should strive for. Even if you're not a elite competitor, aim to be at that level. If you fall short of that, that's fine, but you'll still be a much better grappler than you are if you're not aiming for that. So what is guard retention? And to answer that, first let's just go through what a guard pass is, or what the aim of the person on top is. So a guard pass is essentially where the person on top manages to control this space, control the torso of your opponent. So if I can get in and close this gap to the point where Ari's legs wouldn't be in the way between us, okay? And it could be like this, it could be up on my knees, like so, but I'm controlling this space. Or it's not technically a guard pass, but to get my chest to Ari's back and be attached to his back here as well would also be an upgrade. And that leads us on to what guard retention is. So guard retention is really not letting any of those things happen. So it's the battle to prevent me from getting into control and pass the guard, or to expose the back and get chest to back.
So all the content in this instructional is going to be looking at guard retention, but not from a set guard. So we're not going to be looking at how to retain guard from a collar ankle de la Riva or a collar sleeve position. We're solely looking at guard retention when we're on our back, on our shoulders, and we haven't tied our opponent up inside a guard.
The content we're showing will be often shown in the gi, although we will show some techniques in no gi as well. But just know that the content is applicable both gi and no gi. Where there's a difference in the grips, we'll demonstrate that. Both Ari and I think guard retention is the most important skill to get good at, and we're going to go through 2 reasons why that is. Ari's going to go through the first.
So basically, if you're very confident in your guard retention, you're going to feel a lot safer opening up from your guard to attack. A lot of people tend to not attack as much from their guard because they're worried about getting past.
Yeah, and you're really not going to open up as much. You're going to be much more hesitant to go for your attack if you feel like if you mess it up, you're going to get your guard past. But if you're very confident in your retention, you can just repeatedly go and go and go. Yeah. The other reason to get really good at guard retention is it's one way to make it nearly impossible to lose a match, whether it's in training or in a competition. Because if you think about getting submitted, usually your opponent has to get good position first before they submit you. If your guard gets to the point where it's impassable, no one can pass your guard. They never get to the point where you can get submitted. Now, in a competition point of view, if you happen to pull guard first and your guard retention, you get your guard basically unpassable, then there's no way for them to score on you. And it's going to come down to either a very narrow margin, or obviously if you are better than your opponent in other areas like your offense and so on, you're going to kind of run over them pretty easy. But having that guard retention as your foundational skill set means you really can't lose, or at least not by any real margin, especially by submission, which is obviously the worst way to lose. This instructional will be broken up into 6 different segments. The first, intro and general concepts. The second, around the legs retention. Third, through the legs retention. Fourth, smash pass retention. The fifth, under the legs retention. The last section is on establishing control and dominant position. So how do we get to the point where we are able to control our opponent and they cannot set up a guard pass?
Okay. There's 3 main types of guard passes in Jiu-Jitsu. So one of the ones is through the legs, where I'm literally going through the guard player's legs. For example, a knee cut pass. Then we have around the legs. So this could be, for example, a leg drag pass, where I'm around the guard player's legs. You can also classify the bullfighter or the Toreando pass as an around the legs pass, like so. Then the last one is the under the legs pass. So double under or single under, where I'm literally going underneath my opponent's legs to finish the guard pass. Okay, or the double unders. We also have the smash pass, which is essentially you're going around the legs, but it kind of works a little bit differently to the around the legs pass. So with the smash pass, we're following both of the legs to one side and then passing around to the other side. So in this instructional, we're going to be looking at how to deal with all these different types of guard passes.
So this first chapter being on the introduction and general concepts, it's really to give you an idea of some of the things that apply not just to a single type of guard passing, but to a wide variety of guard passing. So there's some concepts that you want to apply no matter what type of guard pass your opponent does, and we're going to cover that here. We're also going to cover some of the movements that apply not just for a single type of guard passing, but across multiple different types. So you get a good understanding just from this first section how to troubleshoot and problem solve a lot of the things to do while you're rolling. We'll also cover some stretches and ways to improve your mobility to help you with your guard retention. Any of the movements that we cover in this first section, we actually want to cover them in detail in the first section, and we'll probably just cover them very briefly in the section that it might come up again later. For example, if it came up again in around the legs passing, we'll probably cover that movement quite briefly, but we'll add on any additional movements that are specific to that section. So you may very well be going back to this intro section to look at the movements and kind of go through again how to do them. I also want to go through the format of individual sections, for example, around the legs, under the legs, through the legs, because these are going to be structured in a specific way, and understanding that will make it easier to navigate and pick out the thing you need to learn. At first, we'll just have a quick introduction and overview so you get an idea of what's going to be covered in that particular topic, what your options are and what your opponent's options are. Then we'll go through a very general strategy, including movements and concepts that should really get you understanding how to think in the position and how to problem solve, and that should actually account for most of what you need to do. Then we're going to go through the key movements and concepts so you have a really good understanding of how to move and what you're looking to achieve in the position. We then get into your core strategy. So what's the main strategy that's going to accomplish 90% of the problems that arise in the position? Like, how do we solve most of them just using this just core strategy? Then we get into specific scenarios. So each particular type of guard pass someone might do within that section may have a specific solution required, and that's kind of the nitty gritty where we kind of expect you to use that as a troubleshooting section. And lastly, we do a summary called Linking the Techniques, where we try to just bring everything we covered in that chapter together.
How to train guard retention. So the best way to train guard retention when you're in your sparring sessions, when you're rolling, you're basically going to train guard without any grips. You're solely going to focus just on maintaining your feet on the guy's shoulders, hips, biceps, always making sure that you're recovering both your legs to the outside, and you're basically going to be always pushing the guy away. Okay? Every now and then you can establish a guard, and then you're going to let go of the guard and let your training partner continue trying to pass.
So I think training guard retention, it's actually one of the easiest things to train, because you're kind of deliberately losing, and then trying to get a way back to a good position again, and then just deliberately losing again. So you'll definitely get to train it at least once in a roll. Obviously, if you fail at it, sometimes it can be hard to get back there, but the better you get, the more practice you get at it.
Yeah. So initially, it's going to be, for a lot of people, it's quite difficult at first, especially if you're unfamiliar with the principles of guard retention. But over time, you'll start to notice that you'll be able to defend most guard passes with good amount of confidence.
Yeah, if I can talk about my own experience as probably after ADCC 2019, so that's now 9 months ago roughly. I lost some matches because I got my guard passed or nearabouts, which caused me to turtle. And I always thought my guard retention was good, but I came away from that going, okay, I need to work on this again. And that was kind of inspiration for speaking to Ari and working on it. And to be honest, when I first started focusing, like, okay, I'm going to practice retaining guard and not attacking, I was losing a lot more because I was not fighting for those initial grips. But now I feel very comfortable. It took me months and months, and that's as an experienced, obviously quite an experienced grappler to experience that. So I guess if you're new to it, expect it to take a while, but it's absolutely worth your while investing in this. And for me, I feel like my game's improved heaps since then. We're now talking about general concepts that are going to apply throughout different types of guard passing. It doesn't mean they apply for every single guard pass, but whether someone's going, it might be that they apply for when someone's going under the legs and around the legs in certain situations, but things that kind of transcend just a single response to a particular type of guard pass.
We're now covering the following concepts, principles, and strategies. The layers of the guard. When you should be seated and when you should play from a lying down position. The different postures you may take to deny your opponent from closing the gap and securing a pass. Having a small part of your body on the ground to allow for rotation. Keeping your hips far away from your opponent to allow room for your legs to recover. Framing and the importance of frames. Where you should be positioning your legs. How you should be positioning and using your arms. How to use the off balance as a guard retention tool. whether you should be placing your feet on the outside or inside leg positioning, and the pros and cons of each. Not allowing your opponent to control your head. Not allowing your leg to be pinned. Whether you should hip escape or not. When and why the sit-up escape can be useful. Maintaining a square spine and preventing your spine being twisted. Placing your legs in alternate planes. Using your elbows on the ground to both frame and move. And what your late stage options are when you can no longer frame your opponent away to recover guard.
We're going to talk about a really important topic, a concept to understand, which is layers of the guard. And the idea being that generally if you can push your opponent back an extra layer, that each layer you push them back makes an extra step they have to go through to pass your guard. Now this isn't always true, you don't always want to push them back, but for the purpose of practicing your guard retention in particular, this is an excellent concept to work with. So the first layer is I can have the layer of my feet. Okay, so you can see the soles of my feet are in front of Ari and they're blocking his forward advance, right? If he happens to clear the line of my feet, then I should be looking to get that back. But otherwise, I'm just talking about my leg frames, right? Like my leg layers right now. We'll talk about arms in a moment. But then I can use my knees. Okay, so you can see here, I'm using my knees to keep Ari away. It could be like this, could be like, could be here, and he's gonna have to get past my knees. And then he's gonna be looking to control the hip. You know, if I can keep my hip free, that's often going to be a difficult layer for Ari to work through. There's also the layer of his knee. So you see his knee's on the ground. It's worse for me if all I'm holding on to is his foot. So this time if he frees his knee, this is getting worse again. Okay, so working backwards from that, if I've just got the foot, I'm going to often be looking to capture the knee, or get my knee in front, push him back a layer again, and make him further back from being able to pass the guard.
So in terms of our upper body frames, first one we have is a hand, so very end of the lever. Then after this we have a forearm, and then after this we have our face. So the hand frame is generally more preferable. It's kind of like how we would rather frame with our foot as opposed to framing with our knee. Just with our upper body, we'd rather frame with our hand as opposed to framing with the forearm. But the forearm is still a valid frame to have.
We've been talking about layers of the guard and pushing our opponent back further and further layers. I just want to cover this because I do think it's important to understand for offense, which is a good guard can be at any particular layer, and it will involve some level of pushing and some level of pulling. Okay, so if you're playing a guard that your opponent can just back away from, then it's not really a great guard. It's good if they're at distance, but you really want, like, you know, for example, my feet are in the biceps here. I also want something pulling Ari in. Okay, or it could be that I'm gripping his leg, something to stop him disengaging, and something to stop him pressuring in, which could be my frames. Okay, so when we're practicing guard retention, we're trying to frame away a lot of the time, but our eventual goal will be to establish some level of control.
This roll has a good example of layers of the guard. Notice initially my first movement there as the person on top was to try to get past the layer of the feet. I'm trying to push that down and step so that my hips land over the top of that leg. And that gives me, and now here, that gives the top player, myself, some level of control that Ari is generally going to work to try to get that back free. Okay, so you can see this is a through the legs method of trying to work through the layers of the guard. You'll also see an under the legs method as well, and you just see that there's a little battle going on. Usually I'm trying to control the line of the foot. My next aim would be to, and also prevent, if Ari's able to step on me with that other leg, he's then going to be able to free this leg. So I'm trying to step over the foot, and then I want to control the knee line, and Ari is framing, keeping my shoulders away, preventing me from claiming that knee line. Now he's got his other foot in front. That foot came in front. That allowed him to retract his his trapped leg, and he's back to having the full layers ahead of me. This time I've gone under the legs. And which again, once you've gone under the leg, I've stopped him being able to step on my shoulder. But his other legs come in front, so he's managed to push me back that layer and made that very difficult for me to recover. You can see both legs have come in front. So there's this constant battle to work through those layers. You will see an under the legs attempt again after, again, I tried to step through that layer, clear that foot, and I'll end up under the legs here. Okay, and this time, you'll see I managed to get a little further, and I've managed to come past not just the foot, but also with my arm underneath the line of the knee. So this means I'm a little bit further along, and that's a sign that things are getting a little worse for Ari. He's going to be working then to recover and push me back those layers. So again, I'm under both knees now. So he's getting towards, my next aim would be to try to control the line of the hips, but he's pummeled his feet back in front, and that's a sign that he has recovered his guard.
In most scenarios, when we see someone playing guard, either in competition or in training, they're either going to be laying on their back or sitting up. So in this next section, we want to give you an indication of when to be sitting up or when to be lying down. Looking at the seated versus supine guard play position. So when we sit up, we're solely looking to engage and make grips and set up a guard. So in a scenario where my opponent doesn't have a grip on me, I'm much better off sitting up, making grips and establishing a guard. However, in a scenario where my opponent already has grips, I'm going to be much better off going onto my back and fighting from here, because I can engage all four of my limbs. So I can pummel my feet, I can frame with my hands, and I can make grips. So when looking at the seated position, it's ideally a lot more useful to use the seat-up position when our opponent doesn't have grips on us, and we can go on the offense, make our own grips, and pull our opponent into a guard. In terms of guard retention though, if I'm sitting up and my opponent makes grips, I'm quite limited with what I can do with my guard retention. I'm basically just limited to a frame and a hip escape. So it's not that ideal to be using the seat-up guard when our opponent is already attacking a guard pass on us. However, if my opponent makes grips, I'm much better off going to my back, because now I can use my feet a lot more. I'm in a much better position to use my feet. So I can pummel my feet, and I can also use my upper body. So I can engage all four limbs for framing and pummeling, and then I can start to establish a guard and control my opponent from here. So sitting up if our opponent doesn't have grips, going to a back if our opponent makes grips on us first. So if my opponent doesn't have grips on me, I want to be sitting up so I can make grips. Once I have my grips, I want to be going to my back so that I can pull my opponent into a guard. If my opponent has grips on me first, I want to be falling to my back so that I can engage all four limbs to defend the pass and also set up a guard.
So we'll see people playing guard from a seated, some people play guard from a seated position kind of throughout, and some people play from a more lying on your back position. And I'd say, when I think about the people who have the best guard retention in the world, it seems to be a lot more prevalent there. They're playing off their back. It seems to be a bit more common and probably potentially better in terms of that particular skill set.
Yeah, you could potentially argue that certain guards are better off initiated from a seated position, and some other guards better off initiated from lying on your back. But you can still go to any guard from either a seated or laying down position.
In this clip, you'll just get to see from a disengaged position. When we just start the match, I'm rolling with Ben Hodgkinson here. He's a ADCC competitor, competed at ADCC 2019. Quite tall, very good guard passing. So I'm playing from a seated position. It lets me hand fight and try to get control of the arms before I fall to my back. Okay, because you don't necessarily just want to be on your back without any controls. So you see, the hand fighting will occur, and when I get a control of the wrist, then I'm happy to fall back and put my feet in position where I can engage my legs where I want them to be and start to try to set up an attack from there. Okay, so now I can grip onto the leg and start to move and work my attack. All right. You'll see another instance a little later in this roll, where now, same thing. So we're in a disengaged position. I manage to grip onto a leg, and then I fall back so that my feet can be engaged and get towards a position where I can be effective from there.
I'm going to talk about occupying the space that your opponent wants to pass into. So whenever they want to pass the guard, they want to get control of your core, essentially, and we want to occupy the space that they want to work to get into that. And this isn't just one particular posture. I want to get this across because this is often taught as a single posture, for example, keeping your knees to your chest, which is a good one. We're going to talk about that in a very short amount of time, but depending on what type of guard pass they go for, putting your knees to your chest could actually leave you quite vulnerable. The first thing about occupying the space someone wants to pass into is facing your opponent. So if I borrow Ari here, and let's say Ari's side on to me, just standing over here. The space he wants to pass into is here. I need to be closing that off. If I'm facing Ari, I can keep my limbs, we can kind of ball up in front of us very well, and I can block that space. If I happen to be facing away, you look at all this gap he's got to potentially be taking my back. So if you imagine any part of my core being exposed, I can't really defend behind me very well. Okay? Anywhere I push backwards can be easily overcome by Ari's pressure. It's very hard to close that gap off. That's why we want to, from almost all guard passing or guard retention scenarios, we almost always want to try to face our opponent. Just as another example of that, if Ari were to go under the legs and start to pass around, if I'm able to work to face him, I'm going to have a much better chance at recovering my guard. And if Ari were to work in through the legs, again, I want to make sure that I am facing him, and that's going to be much easier to retain my guard.
So in terms of occupying the space, as well as facing our opponent, we also want to have our knees pulled towards our shoulders. Okay? Really basic way to explain this, if Lockie is looking to pass towards one side of my body, if I have my knees separated from my chest, it's going to be a lot easier for him to finish the pass. Okay? So when we have our knees to our chest, we're not just solely looking at flexing at our hip, we're looking at also making sure that our abdominals are engaged, so that if Lockie does start to pull my knee away from my chest, I will be able to follow with my upper body. So we always want to make sure that we occupy the space between our knees and our shoulders. So this works really well against a through the legs pass, if my knees are to my chest. Also works really well with an around the legs pass. Okay. Obviously we wouldn't defend a bullfighter pass like this, but it's just to show you the principle of keeping your knees protecting your upper body. Okay, so it's not just solely about keeping our knees to our chest or shoulders. It's also sometimes going to have to be taking our upper body, our shoulders, towards our knees. Perfect example of this is with the one-arm throw. So just to clarify, when a lot of people say knees to chest, it's not literally knees coming to the chest like this. If I bring my knees to my chest like this, it's a lot easier for my opponent to fold my legs to one side. We want our knees flared out. So if anything, you would want to think more so knees to biceps or knees to shoulders. Okay, this is a much better position, and it's a lot harder for my hips to be redirected like this.
One thing you'll notice if you look at people who are very good with their guard retention, and this is a bit of a flexibility thing, but if you're able to keep your feet, you can see now my feet are past the line of my hips. And what that means is if Ari pushes down on my feet, it flattens my hips to the ground, and it also pulls my knee away from my chest. Okay. What you'll notice with a lot of people with better guard retention, they'll often have their feet sitting a bit, almost like if you look at the plane of my hips here, the feet are higher than that. So we can take the same leg now, for example. If Ari pushes down on that, it actually assists my knee from my hip in flexing. So again, if he pushes down, it flexes my hip, and it also keeps my hips off the ground. So he's not actually like flattening my legs. He could, of course, start to like pull away, but he generally then has to like, you know, to get into a position for that, he has to come like almost right over the top of me to get positioned to then pull away. So by having this position of my feet and trying to actively keep them past the line of my my hips here, it kind of forces Ari over the top and allows me to start to pummel and get good position. And you'll see, when you see Ari roll, you'll see he does this really well. A lot better than I have. I've worked my flexibility. I'm getting there for that, but he's excellent with this. So I said at the start that it's about not letting them occupy the space they want to pass into. And that's why knees to the chest isn't always the only thing you need to be thinking about. For example, if Ari goes under the legs, the space is actually the distance here from essentially from my legs to the ground. And the more I bring my knees to the chest, the more I'm giving him space to pass around. So I want to be taking that away. When someone goes under the legs, you actually want almost the opposite posture. I don't want to curl my back, and I don't want to lift my feet. I want my back flat on the ground and my hips extended. So there's only this space between the floor and my leg. It's impossible to pass underneath that gap unless he's able to move and change my position. So really, if they're going under the legs, we need to think of the space underneath your hips. Don't let your hips lift. Okay, look at this, it's getting worse. Now there's a lot of space for Ari to be moving around and pass.
In this role, you'll see the principle of Ari trying to face his training partner, Mini, and also of keeping his knee, whichever side Mini or David is trying to pass, Ari's really keeping that knee tight to the chest. You see it. David tried to pull that away. We'll just see that again for a moment. So you'll see David tries to pull the knee away from the chest, and Ari really actively works to pull that back. Let's see it. Here it is. He tries to pull the knee away, and Ari's shoulder follows by lifting off the ground, not to give this gap. And then he retracts it back once David let go of that grip. So he's pulling that knee back. And now with the other side facing, so as David's coming around this side, you'll see this knee in particular is staying close to the chest. But it is important that both sides are covered. So you can see that knee close to the chest makes it difficult for David to get under. Ari's being very, very flexible here, but it is an important concept, even without flexibility, to be able to keep that knee tight to the chest and face your opponent. Whichever side they go, make sure you face them. I think you'll see David change sides again, and Ari changes to face Mini again. In this scenario, you can see I'm now doing an under the legs pass, and you'll see a difference in the posture Ari is wanting to take. He's a lot more flat back, and he is starting to push his knee. When he gets the right opportunity to do this, he wants to push his knee away from his chest this time to try to put pressure on my arm. And to close off this, I want to pass under this gap here. So anything under the leg is space for me to move around. The more he can extend that leg, the worse that is for me, and the harder it is for me to use that arm. So you'll see Ari now, as I try to pull him up and stack him and bring his knee towards his chest, he's starting to push and extend his knee away from the chest. This is now giving him room, as that happens, for his other leg to pummel in, and he actually uses this to pummel his feet back in front. And once that foot's back in front of me, he's able to then pummel back to a guard and get out of the position. I just want to clarify here, when I say you want to face your opponent, it's more that you don't want to get turned away. You don't have to be you actually don't want to be all the way on your side on the inside as well, because you have to worry about your bottom leg being pinned. You can see Ben here wants to pin this leg. And by staying, you can see I'm kind of facing upwards at the roof, slightly facing my opponent. But if you go all the way on your side, your leg can get pinned, and that kind of commits you to one side and opens you up when your opponent passes to the other. So we'll talk about what to do later and how to not let your leg get pinned, but just be aware, and you'll just see the postures here. Sorry, when it loads, but you see, even as Ben starts to move around the side, I don't turn all the way in to face him as such. I kind of keep facing slightly towards the roof and a very slight angle towards him without committing too much to being on my side. And you'll see that in a whole bunch of different roles, that particular posture.
So where guard retention is concerned, we obviously have some situations where we're going to need to spin and invert. Now, when we invert, it's going to be a lot easier to invert if we just keep a small part of our body on the floor. Okay, so what I mean by this is, if I want to spin, it's going to be a lot harder for me to spin if I have my butt and my upper back on the floor. Okay, whereas if I start to curl slightly at my lower spine, I more so just have my upper and mid back on the floor. So it's a lot easier for me to spin. Okay? So if I were to play guard against Lockie and he were to attack a bullfighter on me and my back was quite flat, one, it's harder for me to keep my knees to my shoulders, but also if I wanted to spin to defend his bullfighter and invert out of his bullfighter, it would be a lot harder if I have a large surface area of my body on the floor. Whereas, let me just get my bullfighter to this side. Whereas if I keep a small part of my body on the floor, when he starts to redirect my legs, I can spin a lot easier.
Here you can see I have a very small amount of my back on the ground, and this is going to help me spin. As Dan starts to walk around, I'm going to be able to use my arms and my legs to generate momentum to spin on a very small part of my back, and you'll see it turns me all the way around. Well, all the way to face the other direction. Here we are, and there's the spin, and that actually allows me an angle on the other side to set up an attack.
A really important principle we're going to be working in a bunch of different ways that people pass scout is having your hips away. If I can have my hips further away from Ari, it means I've got more chance of pummeling my feet. If he closes the gap and he's very close to my hips, it becomes very difficult to pummel the feet in. So whether going under, around, or through, generally we're looking to make more distance with our hips. It'll make it easier for the pummeling to occur.
So this role with Dan, who's a very good brown belt that we train with, is a good example of trying to keep your hips away. Or basically hips need to be away, and you can see it's kind of by inverting that I'm doing that. So you can see I kind of, when I move my hips away, it's via almost an inversion process, because it lets my feet face my opponent. So you can see here, I deliberately move my hips away, allowing more room for either leg to start to come back in. And you'll see a few examples, particularly when someone's trying to pass through the legs and they are starting to really pressure for something like a knee cut, because you can get crowded reasonably easily here. Okay, if you don't get your hips out. For example, here, Dan started to turn me a bit and he's crowded me, and I'm going to want to try and swing my hips out. We use a high pummel action to do that, and you see my hips moving away now. And as I'm doing that, my foot is getting more chance to pummel in. So that foot would not have been able to reach had my hips not continued to turn. You can see now that my hips are out, this foot could actually quite easily pummel in front. Whether I do or not, it probably won't because I'm spinning through, but yeah, it is a very important concept to be aware of trying to make space with your hips to allow your feet to coming back. Anytime you feel jammed, we might see another example of it here. I've already got my feet in front, so I probably don't have to follow that so much here. But if you do feel jammed, moving your hips out is often a great way. There we go. Again, moving my hips out, slight invert motion, and you can see that's giving me a chance to pummel my legs back in front. Again, hips away and feet coming back in front. When we say hips away, it's really important that when your opponent starts to get control of you, for example, here, Ari is front on with Sam, but you'll see as soon as Sam starts to get control of this leg, Ari starts to change his hip angle and move his hips out to the side. So you're almost starting to begin the invert already. You can see he's now got an angle, his hips are away, and this can start to help him move. Okay, so again, we don't want to just stay in front of our opponent while they get controls. As soon as we lose our controls we have on our opponent, we want to get our hips out. Once more, you can see that here. Ari swings, and then he's able to recover his legs back, and then once he gets his grips, he may want to square back up. You can look at an older clip when I was just starting to play with some of these concepts, and you'll see when George starts to get control, I left my hips where they were, and that actually gets me in a lot of trouble in this scenario. So I stay here, and you'll see George reaches under the legs, and I need to get my hips out. As soon as he started to reach for that, my hips should be moving out to the side. Because I'm square on, he's under the leg, he's now going to have a good ability to lift and turn me, and then I have to work to recover from there. Now you can see me as a bit more experience with this style of guard retention. And you can see I'm moving my hips away. You'll see a few times here that I make sure my hips are off center as Maddie starts to attack. So you can see my hips are out. As he starts to attack, I shift my hips to the other side. And again, you'll see him go under the leg, similar to how George did in that previous clip. And I will throw my hips out to the side here. As he reaches under, my hips come out. And this gives me room to get my knee shield in and use that to frame and recover my bottom leg and not get in such a precarious position like in that previous clip.
We mentioned frames earlier when we talked about layers of the guard. We're going to go a bit more into frames now. So really the purpose of a frame is often to allow you to move around it and make more distance and build your next frame. For example, if I've got a forearm frame here, this might allow me to start to move my body, and it really stops your opponent from closing the gap. So when you've got one frame, you can often make space, get another frame, make space, get another frame, and start to build more structure on top of that until you've got good distance on your opponent.
In regards to frames, we always want to make sure that we frame both of the shoulders. The reason why is because my opponent can rotate or deflect the frame. So a good example of this is with the inside De La Riva position. I'm doing a good job by framing this shoulder, but if I don't frame the other shoulder, it's really easy for Lockie to rotate out of the frame. However, if I have this shoulder occupied with the frame and now my hand occupying the second shoulder, it's really hard for him to rotate.
A good example of this, a lot of time it's taught as a knee cut defense to frame the far shoulder, almost like with both hands here, which will often allow Ari's near shoulder here to start to fall in, okay, unless I've got some control of that. So you'll see later, but we often like to, our preference is to frame both shoulders here for the knee cut. That's going to give us a much better chance at recovering.
We're going to talk about exactly where to frame using our legs. And the first thing I want to talk about is a very common mistake I see, not just in beginners, but in people who've been training quite a long time too, which is trying to put feet on the hips or legs. So if Ari's standing up, I often see people framing here, or very beginners often go to the knees. More advanced people often look to the hips. Now, if I don't have control of Ari's upper body and his posture, it's a terrible idea to put my feet on the hips. It just lets him move around, and usually what's happened is I've given space between my knee and my chest. So if we go back, once I have, if I had good control here or a 2-on-1 or something, okay, now this can be good because it's hard for Ari to disengage, but we don't want to go feet on the hips without any upper body control. We want to go towards the biceps and the shoulders, which makes it much more difficult for our opponent to react. Another important concept on frames is they're actually very difficult to clear while they're engaged. Often a good frame can only be circled or pummeled by disengaging. So if I keep a lot of pressure on my bicep here, on that foot, and try and pummel, you see he can't get rid of it. But if Ari was to move back a bit, and there's not much tension now, he's actually able to circle it. Okay, so often when we've got frames, we want some sort of counter pressure to keep it secure by pulling in. So understanding that if Ari is able to disengage the frame, he might be able to pummel it. We do have to compromise a little bit sometimes our knee to the chest thing, because if let's say Ari's pressured in, okay, knee to my chest is absolutely, or when I say chest, it's tucked in, occupying this space. If he backs away a little bit, I'll quite happily engage him for a moment. If it starts to get too far and I'm starting to feel like he might win control here, we'll often pull back and disengage that. But in that moment, if I wanted to maintain control, maybe as I'm reaching, I'd quite happily follow. There's disengaged a little bit, but I could get control, and then I keep control with the foot on the bicep. So you have to weigh up sometimes this knee to the chest and tracking their bicep to keep your frame engaged. But be willing to come back to good defensive position if you feel you're losing control. So on saying that, it's definitely a bad idea to be fully extending out. It's a huge lever as well that
that Ari can work with, and I've opened too much space. So when we say this, it's only to a certain degree.
I'm not going to say too much about frames, just going to get to watch, and I just want you to observe some key things about them. First of all, they're preemptive. Look at, as soon as my legs are cleared, you can see my hand is, at least one hand is usually outstretched, looking to create a frame to outstretch so my legs can replace it. So that's really important. I'll have a look at myself and Ari rolling, and just observe the frames for a moment and just see how important it is that you do get some sort of leg or arm in front of your opponent's shoulder or torso, and have that ready to collect as you go. So here you can see Ari, as soon as, if I'm able to clear his legs, then he'll be framing with his arm. He'll do the same on the other side. You see, even under the legs, he'll get his frames in. Yeah, as I said, the more preemptive you can be with it, the better. And it's really important that you are working to frame, whether your arms or your legs, whatever's available. And if it's not, then you need to find and make space to do that.
There are 4 main ways the guard passer can clear our feet from his upper body. So there are also 4 main ways that we can move and change the direction of our feet so that it's hard for him to redirect our legs. So in regards to guard retention, the leg pummeling is a constant active process. Okay, so there's always a suitable foot positioning for a particular movement the guard passer is trying to do. Okay, so where the feet on the biceps are concerned, this is really good simply if our opponent is basically just pushing into us, okay? Or trying to do some kind of pass where he redirects our legs to one side. However, if my opponent starts to go under my legs, the feet on the biceps isn't going to help. What would be a better foot positioning is if I were to lasso my foot behind the shoulder blade. Now it's really hard for him to go under my legs. If I use this lasso position though, it's a lot easier for my opponent to now start to swap to passing around the legs. So in this scenario here, I would be better off bringing my feet back to the biceps. Sometimes when our feet are on the biceps, because of the space between the inside of our shin and the guard passer's torso, it's actually really easy for them to re-pummel to the inside. So sometimes it's a lot better to keep the foot closer towards the chest with your heel digging under the armpit. That way, when your opponent tries to deflect and pummel your foot out, it's a lot harder. Another scenario that you'll see is when our opponent looks to throw the leg to one side. If we keep our feet on the biceps here, it's pretty much impossible to stop. However, if we take our feet to the outside, now his own forearm obstructs my leg. Okay? My opponent is trying to bullfight at me. I'm going to keep my feet on the biceps. If he tries to throw my legs to one direction, I'm better off keeping my feet on the outside of the forearms. If he tries to go underneath my legs, I'm better off pummeling my feet to the back of the shoulder. If he is trying to pummel my feet off the biceps, I'm better off closing my heel towards his ribs and my heel sticking underneath his armpit.
So this happens really fast, obviously, so I'm putting it in slow motion. But the first thing to note is that the feet do face towards the biceps and the shoulders. They're not going towards the legs, as we talked about. Now you'll just see a little grip battle here, and as I said, it does happen quite quickly. But you'll see Ari is going to pummel we'll look at his left foot here. So I controlled that foot, but the way he's pummeled it, he's chopped on the inside. Okay, so you can see I gripped that foot, I'll go back and we'll just look at that again. I grip that foot here, so I've got control of it for a moment. But because of his angle, he's able to chop through that and regain control and then put the foot on the bicep. As he puts the foot on the bicep, I try to circle inside and I couldn't. Okay, I couldn't circle inside to clear it, so I've come over the top of the foot in the bicep. And then I've managed to start to strip that and try to control that leg, but again, Ari's immediately, as I control it, circling back over the top. You see that stripped my grip. I no longer have control of that leg, and his foot's come back in the bicep. And eventually, now my hand's on the inside again. I try to clear it away, but I'm unable to, and it makes me back out to. So I try to clear that and strip it. I'm unable to, and I end up just backing out. Okay, so I guess the key thing to understand there is it's a constant battle. You have to learn the feel for defending different types of ways people try to clear it, and you're constantly battling to keep your control on the bicep.
One thing that's really important is, in terms of our leg pummeling, is the angle between my shin here and Ari's forearm. Okay, so you can see right now, what I want to do to actually pummel back is a back heel. Right now, that doesn't help me at all. If I pull when I say back heel, pulling my heel towards my butt, you can see Ari maintains control. So see, he's kind of on the inside of this grip, and that's not going to help. Okay, so a lot of what we're doing when we pummel and working with our leg position is trying to get it so my shin, the angle of my shin cuts on the inside of the forearm here. So you see it's almost like crosses. Here it doesn't cross. I want to have it so that my shin will cross. As soon as that happens, it means I can pummel inside, and I actually control this now. Ari's holding my leg, but he's not really controlling my leg. I've actually got control of the position. Whereas when it's on the outside, Ari's controlling me. And this is a great way to break a grip as well. So Ari might even be holding my leg, and I can't break his grip on me, but I'm able to turn. So it's not just, I say it's like my shin here, but the way I chop, which is actually to do with where my hips face, now I chop inside the forearm. That will strip that grip and allow me to gain control. Okay, so this is something that's going to come up a lot. You want to get used to that particular action. So talking about upper body frames now, we know that we can frame with an outstretched hand or with our forearm, and it's preferable to get our outstretched hand first. And I really want to emphasize the importance of getting your upper body frames early. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that someone will be trying to pass, and then by the time they actually frame, they're kind of like here with a bent arm, and this is going to collapse. If Ari just drops his weight in, I can't sustain that pressure. So if we go back, we're really waiting with it, whichever side he's going to it. We're very active at intercepting that arm or wherever we're going to frame, which is actually what we're going to talk about now. So whichever part of the body Ari leads with will determine where I frame. See how he's very low here? So he's got a very low posture. He's kind of leading with his shoulder. That's where I'm going to frame. Sometimes he'll keep his feet away, but be kind of more tall and starts coming in to pass here. This time I'm going to go to the bicep. Okay, and this will work for different types of guard passes too. But if I was to go up to if you do that same one again, if I go up to the shoulder here, you can see he's getting much closer to me, and I get in danger with an outstretched hand going so high. So down, when I say bicep, like almost at the elbow there is pretty common. And sometimes people don't lead with their upper body, they lead with their legs. He might step in with his legs. I need to be blocking the leg and using that to get myself back in front. So really, just pay attention. This, again, if Ari goes under the legs, it's a similar sort of principle. If his shoulders are leading first, we're going to be leading with the shoulders. He might lead with his arms, so he might just reach one hand around. If he's leading with his arms, I'm going to frame near the bicep. And if he's leading with his legs, sometimes people's shoulders are away and their legs come really close. We can be framing off the leg to help us make distance too. If we're struggling we want to have a straight arm for our frame. If you're struggling to get that arm straight, there's a few things you could possibly do. You could pull your shoulder towards your head. That way it gets shorter. So instead of collecting here with a bent arm, which will get collapsed, I can pull my shoulder towards my head. And I can also rotate my spine, tilting my shoulders away like this. And this will often let me get a stiff arm frame. And then obviously on the inverse, we can start to push and curl our head in if we want to make more distance. So just talking about our upper body frames, my arm frames, and let's say Ari's just come forward for like a knee through pass, for example, and how we can add distance for this, because distance is important. Often what we want is to be able to replace our frame with our leg, and this much distance can make a huge difference. So first off, making sure that you protract your shoulders. That's the action of my shoulder here, where I bring my shoulder blade forward. Look at how much further my hand can go in a protracted position, rather than having my arm back down on the ground, like pulled back like this. Okay, so we can protract like so. And also where you frame with, on the arm is important as well. So we're using an outstretched hand, which is obviously straight. That's the maximum distance we can cover, and it's also skeletal strength. So if he was very heavy and tried to pressure through that, it's like, because it's my skeleton, it's going to be quite strong. If you were to bend your arm at all, that's going to collapse quite quickly if it's someone heavy. So we've got a straight arm. Now you can frame with the palm of your hand, but that's actually kind of the closest that Ari can be to me. Okay. Whereas I've got two other areas I like to frame with. Actually, one I just stole from Ari quite recently. But I've got the palm of my hand. You can use this part of your hand too. So you can see the distance between my palm. It's actually further if I go in this kind of C grip sort of frame here. So this is going to keep him further. And then even further again, this is Ari's specialty, is using the like, what do we call this? The paw of the ball of the hand, I think we call it. Okay, so like this. Okay, and you see that's even further again than that C grip. All right, so now if Ari's pressuring there, you see, I'll just show you the difference. We go here, keep pressuring, good. And then I've got the C grip, he's a little closer, and then I've got the palm of my hand where he's a bit closer again. So if you're intercepting, you're going to want the maximum distance possible. There is one other factor to consider though, because I often use this C grip because it's very difficult to deflect. Okay, so if R is forward here again, you can see I'm blocking. Usually when someone wants to deflect a frame, they change the angle. They kind of come in on this angle, or they might circle. You know, he might circle and deflect it out to the side. When you have this C shape, it prevents any sort of circling. So try to circle my hand left or right. My grip there, or coming over and pressuring in. I'm kind of covering. It prevents my hand sliding out this way or that way. So the frame's quite stable. The only way he's going to really deal with a C grip style frame is to move away, back out, and then you see I've lost it, then it can be deflected. But that was my purpose of the frame, was to make more space. So if I get a good C grip frame on both shoulders, for example, it's going to force Ari to kind of back away to try to deal with it. And now I've got my feet in front. Or we can just be using that to retain our feet anyway. So one thing about no-gi and framing is we're usually having to make a choice to either have a frame or be pulling towards our opponent. Rarely does our grip do both at the same time, unless you're getting a very small joint, potentially around the wrist where you can almost close the gap. Then you might be able to push or pull with it. And that's where there's a bit of a difference in the gi, because you can really close around something like a collar quite strongly, and that's going to allow you to frame with it and pull your opponent with it.
This next topic, we're going to be looking at gi-specific frames. The first frame we're going to be looking at is the collar grip. We can make a cross collar grip or a same side collar grip. Whichever collar you grab, you are essentially, if you're looking at a frame, you're preventing that shoulder from coming closer to you. So if I frame with a cross collar grip, I'm preventing the right shoulder from coming towards me. If I make a same side collar frame, I'm preventing the left shoulder from coming towards me. Now, sometimes what you'll notice is a lot of people, especially when they play De La Riva guard, they'll make this really deep back of collar grip here. It is good for turning the face away, but when you make this grip, it's really hard to frame. So when you make your collar grip, and if you want to kind of keep a little, like a little backup plan, I guess, just in case you go from being offensive to defensive, you make sure your collar grip is at the level of the collarbone. So you can now start to punch away. You can also redirect your knuckles towards your opponent's throat if you're really trying to push your opponent away. Same thing applies with the same side collar grip as well. Another gi-specific frame that we will be covering is the sleeve grip frame, really commonly used in the double under position. So when the double unders pass is concerned, I'm not simply just holding onto the sleeves, I'm also pushing them away so that it's actually harder for my opponent to progress forward and stack me up. Also making it more difficult for him to cut his arm across my center line by pushing away. Sometimes if you just hold, it's really easy for your opponent to go to the inside of your forearm and cut the hand across.
So looking at arm positioning and where to place the arms. So one of the key things are your arms will be used for frames, but often at first you're trying to keep your legs in front of your opponent. And one of the first things is just making sure your legs stay in good position. So I'm often using my arms at first to reinforce my legs and prevent my legs getting out of position. Only once Ari starts to clear the legs out of position do I start using my arms to frame so that I can get my legs back into position, as in framing on my opponent. So arms can be used to frame my own legs, frame my opponent, or even be used to push off the ground to move. And we'll see each of these in a very short sequence, and also just a little bit on where we're framing. Okay. So you can see here, right now, my legs I'm trying to keep my legs in the position I want, and I've actually pushed off the ground with my hand to help spin me to reface Ari. Okay, so that helped me spin. And then my frame here, as he gets around, I've framed his elbow, so nice and low on the elbow. Too high would expose my arm for the armbar, but down low you can see my elbow sits well below the hips, and that's going to allow me to continue to spin my hips back through. He's obviously made an angle. I'm going to try to reclaim that angle by spinning back. There we are. So by framing, it helped me spin. And you can see now Ari's wanting to push my leg down, and I'm reinforcing my own leg. So just noticing the positioning of the arms, they're often sitting almost underneath your knees like this, ready to reinforce your arms while your legs are in position. Okay, see both elbows sitting quite low. I'm not sitting there, and a big mistake is to have both arms outstretched. We only need to stretch our arms out once our legs have started to be cleared, or if Ari came close enough, especially in the gi, that I could actually establish my own grip. So you see again, Ari started to try to pin my leg. I've gripped my own leg to prevent that from being pinned. And then, because he's managed to push my feet down, you can see both feet are down now. I've lost them being in different planes, which we'll talk about later. But because of that, my frame has come in on the shoulder now to keep him driving forward, prevent him from covering this space. And that should give me room to start to bring my leg back up, framing my own leg, and get it back in front. So I guess the key is here, keeping your elbows low, being able to frame whatever's close. So you can see the shoulder sometimes, the elbow if he's leading with the elbow, and the legs if the legs are too close. But also framing your own legs and using your elbow on the ground to help yourself move. Just here, you'll see an example of framing the leg as well when the legs come too close. So Ari started to stack me. You can see his knees are coming really close, and that's really what's keeping my hips up. You can see his knees have jammed behind my hips, and you'll see me push on the leg in a moment. So I tried pushing the arm first, and he stepped really far forward, and the arm's not now pushing the arm of basically like, I'm straightening my arm almost, and it's not doing too much, so I'll switch to the leg. And that actually helps me drop my hips. See, by pushing his leg, my hips have dropped lower, and that gives me space to then, keep working his arm. Now that my hips have dropped, I've got more availability to start clearing frames with framing away his arms and making space. So, the general rule being that we frame whatever's in front of us or whatever's leading the pressure drive.
Now, frames are the primary way we look to recover our guard. So we look to kind of make frame and get our opponent further and further away. But another tool we have is to try to bring our opponent too far forward, to get them to post office. Because in reality, and guard passing is a very difficult thing to do, because Ari's trying to get control of a very narrow part of my body. He's only got really one direction that he wants to go. And he's going to have to deflect and do a lot of good things to get there. Whereas anywhere else I can make him go is generally a good thing. So if I'm trying to frame away and Ari is very heavily pulling in against that and putting all his weight, like really pull here, so I can't make distance, often we can bring our opponent forward, make them post, and that will then allow us to make distance again and frame afterwards. Now, we talked before about trying to bring our opponent forward and why that's a good idea. Like if I can get Ari's hands to the mat, then I can start to, he's not going to control this space and I can frame. I just want to talk about the mechanism we tend to use for that, which is load, collapse, and off balance once we've got their weight on us. So what I mean by that, let's say we're here, Ari's pressuring me. I want to first load up, like put as much pressure into me as possible, not by pulling, because then if I pull into me, Ari will accept that. I want him to actually pull himself harder. So if I'm actually pushing away, and loading. This is the load phase. Ari's trying to pull in, like say you're trying to get chest to chest. I start pushing and he starts pulling even harder. Okay, because otherwise I'm going to frame away. Okay, so in this example, Ari's actually letting me frame him away. Don't let me frame. Yes, more. Okay, so now I can't get my frames any further. So this is the load part. Then I collapse in. Everything draws in like this. Okay, and this is where his weight's on top of me. And then I can off balance. I can change the plane and make him move out of the way. Okay, but it is important that you have that first like push, get them to load up as much weight as possible on you. Try to frame. And then everything draws in. And then we change our angle and off balance.
In a moment here, you're going to see Ari use the off balance to recover, or really off balance me actually. So you can see I'm trying to pressure in. I'm on top and I've got my grip on Ari's collar and I'm trying to open. He's got his half lasso in and he's reinforcing his arm. I'm going to try to use my elbow to open that up so I can put my knee on top and start to like try to open some space between his knee and his armpit. And so there we are. So I clear the leg and I managed to put my weight down. And as I start to commit my weight, Ari's already beginning his off balance. So he pulls me in and across, and that's taken me right out of position. So you'll see I actually end up sitting down on my butt. So Ari's now got very good offensive position thanks to that off balance movement. Okay, so once more, as I really pressure in, and the best timing for it is actually as I start to drop my weight in, which Ari is on, he captures the off balance and swings me off. You can notice a little push-pull there. Actually, you can see he kind of like pushes out for a moment with his hand and then pulls across.
A very important strategic decision you'll make when playing guard is where you're putting your legs. Okay, and we can just break it down into 3 separate things here. They can be feet on the inside, like this. So see both feet go in. They could be feet on the outside, where both my feet are. So when I say inside, it's kind of like between Ari's legs here. They can be both on the outside, somewhere here, or on the hips. They're outside the legs. Or you could go one in and one out. Now there's effective games people who can play guard in each of those styles quite well. So what is the best for guard retention? Now, if we think about layers of the guard, really when you have one leg go inside the legs, you've lost one layer. Ari has now taken one layer away, and it's probably my strongest distance maker, which is my ability to kick to make space, like this kind of stomp action to make space. So from a purely guard retention perspective, any guard or any time that we start to play an inside leg positioning, we're probably allowing our opponent a little more chance to start to set up a pass. So not saying that you can't play guards like this, but from the perspective we're taking in this instructional, when a leg gets trapped like this, we want to be working to get it back on the outside where we can use both feet to protect ourselves from being passed. Now, even if your preference is to play, for example, a butterfly guard with inside, like feet on the inside, the tactics and the tools we're going to give you to recover from here are still going to be useful. Because if you get put in a bad spot, for example, if Ari were to cover my hips here and I no longer have positioning, understanding how to frame and get my feet back on the outside will really stifle his pass. And then I can set up grips. And if I wanted to play on the inside again, I can now come in with much better positioning. So it's still going to be useful. It's probably more useful if you're playing outside leg positioning guards such as K-guard and De La Riva, open guards, or one in, one out guards such as headquarters or reverse De La Riva, waiter style guards. Let's take a look at some of the guards that we would consider outside leg positioning. So we have spider guard, collar sleeve guard, De La Riva guard, K guard, and closed guard. What we would consider inside leg position guards would be butterfly guard, half butterfly guard, shin to shin, and what we would consider one in and one out style guards are reverse De La Riva, knee shield, half guard, sit up guard, and waiter guard. The other consideration there is leg entanglements such as single leg X, X guard, and 50-50. I kind of consider the leg entanglements almost as their own separate thing, which can be entered to from each of the inside one in, one out, or outside position guards.
One of the most important rules in regards to guard retention is to never let the guard passer hug your head, especially when you don't have good leg positioning. So let's say I'm getting knee cut, my legs are kind of out of the way at the moment. If I let Lockie hug my head, I've basically lost the battle here. So firstly, when someone has gotten close enough to hug your head, they have the chest to chest connection. Okay, all they need to do now is basically get rid of this, their foot. It's the only thing that I have to stop the pass. Now, whenever someone hugs your head, they can also start to turn your face away with the cross fist. The second your spine gets contorted in those opposing directions, you basically lose a significant amount of power. So that's another reason why you don't want someone to ever hug your head. Also as well, when someone starts to hug your head, you can also, if the cross face is placed well enough, they can start to choke you. However, if someone ever tries to hug your head when you have really good leg positioning, so if you have outside leg positioning, maybe you've got a foot hooking the shoulder, a foot connected to the hip. If Lockie tries to hug my head now, this is really bad for him because now I can start to attack his arm.
So one reason in no-gi in particular, it's very difficult to attach to your opponent without getting onto the head. So let's say I've cleared this and Ari's framing and he's pushing me away. Elbows and forearms, anything I grip here can kind of be disengaged, especially if it's slippery and sweaty. But often once you're actually able to connect to the head, you've got like a hook now to actually counteract any kind of push. So if Ari's trying to push here and I'm pulling, this is much more likely to stick than any sort of grip on an arm, and obviously a body lock would be another good grip relative to that. But by not letting our opponent get the head in no-gi, the chance of actually attaching to our body is much less.
So in terms of grabbing the head, I mean, what you'll always see is something like this, a frame blocking so we just look back at that, a near side arm framing, preventing that arm from reaching towards the head, or you're going to see the outside leg. So if this top leg can get in front, then you can push them away, and it doesn't matter if they try to grip your head then, because you can be pushing them away with your far leg, or you have your feet on the outside. If your feet are on the outside, then they're unable to grip your feet either. But you see Ari's constantly trying to pummel that outside leg in front, or if he doesn't have that, he's got that arm in front of the arm, preventing that access to the head. See that arm, and then the legs come in front.
Another important rule with guard retention is to never let one of your legs get pinned to the floor. The moment one of your legs gets pinned to the floor, you've essentially lost the ability to use this leg as a frame to recover your guard. Now, basically what's happened is the moment my legs have been pinned, all I have is just my top leg. And also, when a leg gets pinned, it's a lot easier for my hips to be turned to one direction. So whenever your hips get turned to one direction, the other side of your body that you're not facing is usually free for the guard pass. So what we can look to do whenever we feel our leg is starting to get pinned towards the mat, we can choose to take our upper body towards our lower body so that we basically reset the angle and we stop our opponent from actually pinning our leg. Okay? So a good example of this is, let's say Lockie looks to pin my leg for a knee cut. If I don't do anything, I'm going to get stuck in the knee cut, and now I have to look at knee cut retention. Whereas I can completely bypass this altogether by taking my upper body towards my lower body.
So just with that, because I know you do this action on me a lot, it's really like preemptive, isn't it? Like
you don't let me push to the ground. That's going to be much more difficult to get underneath your leg. But as it's going down, you're going to curl underneath your leg and recover. And it's the change in plane that I think is really important. So you see here, when I pin your leg, your heel is facing backwards. We're very weak at moving like sideways like this. This is our adductors. It's a weak muscle group, but our hamstrings and glutes are much stronger. So if you're able to turn your heel to face back at me, that's going to be much harder for me to fight. And if you watch this, Ari, as he does this, now his hamstring faces me, and he can really like push off as I'm trying to pass. And I know throughout this series, we're going to use this principle a few times. It's going to be in the open guard if they try to pin. It's going to be if I start coming in for a near side knee through, we're going to pin. There's going to be quite a few leg drags. We use the same sort of thing.
Yeah. With our leg position being on our side, we don't want this leg to get pinned. So instead of having our foot down, you should always have your foot pointed up. And in addition to that, on the chance that it is going to get pinned, you want to have your heel facing up and toes facing down. So if you do get that leg pinned, you're in a better position to be pushing off the ground and inverting through.
In this example, you can see Ari pushing down to pin my legs. He's working a lot to try to pin my bottom leg. So you'll see here, for example, here, he's pushed that leg down. That's opening some space, and I want to try to prevent that by curling in. So you can see I curl my head in towards my leg, as Ari was mentioning, and now my leg is on an angle where I can use my hamstring curl, like curling this way, to start to try to retain my leg. There we are. Now my leg's back in front of the body. So you can see that again. Happened quite fast, but Ari's pushed the leg down, and I've extended it out and brought my head in towards my leg to try to curl it back in. And you'll see a few more examples of this. Ari's really working to pin my leg in this, and you see each time I really try to change that angle by bringing the head in. So here we are again. I can use my hand to assist my leg so it doesn't get pinned. See that? I grip under my calf to stop it going to the ground, and then I try to work my angle and start to bring my leg back. Just want to add an extra point on this. It's important that you bring your head in, but it's also really important that you move your hips away. You're not just moving towards your leg, you're actually trying to suck that leg they're trying to pin out and away from you. We'll have a look at Ari here, and it's a very preemptive move as well. So you've seen me recovering from kind of more stuck positions. You don't want to let your leg get all the way stuck. You want to almost immediately do it. So look here, I'm going to try to pin Ari's left leg with my hand. I go to pin it, and then Ari's already begun his invert, and he's sucked his hips away, and it's made that very difficult for me to attach to, and he's then able to recover back with some fancy movements. An additional note on this is just how you're gripping your own leg when you do try to use your hand. It should be with your thumb on the outside, so palm up, thumb on the outside. Some people grip it the wrong way, kind of intuitively, but the wrong way. And you just see a few examples here. Ben's on top, and one of his main things is to try to pin the leg. And you see a few examples of me using my hand to kind of preemptively try to avoid that. You can see I got my hand there, and I resist that, rolling my hips through and using my hand to stop that from occurring.
A very important concept throughout our guard retention, pretty much for everything except when you're stuck under half guard, is never hip escape. Or on top of that, it's really don't put your feet on the floor unless it's your bottom inside leg on occasion. Okay, so let's just first look at the hip escape. So the hip escape is designed, so do you want to show the action, Aaron? So he's going to put his foot on the mat, and he uses it to move his hips away. Okay, and it's designed, and it's really commonly taught as a way to make distance. So you see it gets Ari's hips away, which is what he wants, and it makes him face me as well. Okay, so that's two positive things that he has done to try to recover guard. So why do we think it's bad then? Well, you're giving up this space, okay? This space between the knee and the chest. What I want to do on top as the passer is control this space. If I can get in anywhere from this, like an underhook, down towards the hip, or even on top of this leg, this is becoming very dangerous for Ari if I control this space. So if I've got him in a position where he wants to hip escape and put his foot on the mat, I will quite gladly take that space. And it's really impossible for him when he puts his foot there to cover all of that space. He might block like here, but I can still at least go down on the leg. There's too much of a gap that he's giving for me to control here, okay? So although you might achieve the objective of moving your hips away, I feel like what you're giving up by doing that is bad, and an advanced guard passer will take advantage of that and ends up being a bad decision, okay? So we don't want to do that. It can be sometimes okay to put your bottom foot on the ground if your hips are turned down, okay? Because then we can use that to invert or to potentially do like a hip escape there, okay? But we never want to put our top leg on the ground, or at least only in a half guard scenario, which we'll cover in that section. So what do we do instead? Well, we have something called a high pummel. You're going to learn that a little bit later, but it achieves exactly the same thing. If you want to do a high pummel, we won't talk about how to do it yet, but if Ari does the high pummel, it achieves the same thing. His hips move away, he faces me, but he doesn't give up that space. There's another action where we will put our foot on the floor, which is the gongoe. Again, you'll learn this action later, but again, it's our bottom leg. Even though it starts off being our top leg, when we get turned away, we can put our foot on the ground, facing down, but again, it becomes the bottom leg in that scenario, and that is okay to do that.
We're going to talk about sitting up and when it's a good idea to sit up. So we kind of talked about this already, but if my knees ever get disengaged, well, someone's pulling my knees away from my chest, then that's a good time to sit up with it, and that can give us a chance to move and recover and retain position. Now, where you don't want to do it is usually if someone's kind of like above the line, if they've got some level of control above the line of my hips, then I think that's a bad idea. For example, if Ari managed to pass almost a knee right or something here, and I start trying to sit up here, this can often be, keep stay on knee right, like he's kind of got control here, and I start trying to sit up. This is not good. I'm actually exposing myself here to arm locks and so on. So, but where you would use it, even like for things like a smash pass, and there's going to be a few scenarios here where Ari's weight is actually down near the hips, it's often a good idea to sit up like this, because you now give them two problems to deal with. He wants to go around my legs, but if he tries to go around my legs while I'm up, it actually frees start to walk around. It actually lets me build my base back up. Okay, to stop me continuing to stand, Ari has to be in front of me, because he drive back against me now. Yeah, pressure, I can't stand up here. If he takes his weight off by trying to circle around, I actually do get a chance to come up to my knees and start building my base further. So it's a way of actually keeping your opponent in front of you in these kind of bad positions until you can start pummeling your legs back or stand up and start to recover. I just want to emphasize that we are talking about late stage positioning where my knees have started to be pulled away. We don't want to actively just sit up like this without being put into a bad position, or at the initiation of our match or fight where there's no grips. That can be a good time to sit up too.
Another extremely important rule for guard retention: you do not want your spine to be contorted. When my legs get folded to one side and they pass the midline, but my upper body hasn't followed, my spine is contorted. And the reason why this is bad is because now my upper body is really separated from my lower body. Not just in terms of the literal separation of my knees from my shoulders, but more so from a movement perspective. Like, it's very hard for me to generate a significant amount of power in terms of framing the guard passer away when my spine is twisted. So whenever our legs get turned one direction, our upper body has to follow our legs. Now, we want to make sure that we don't take this too literally in the sense that we just turn our backs. It's not solely just about this. We actually have to make an effort to square back up with our opponents. So when my legs get turned away and my spine gets contorted, I need to take my upper body towards my lower body and then square back up.
So one of the best examples of not letting your spine twist is with when your legs are getting twisted and you don't want to keep facing your opponent as your legs face away. You want to turn your body with your legs so you can recover that way. And you'll see Ari doing that in a moment. Here, Minnie or Dave tries to throw the leg, but Ari's able to keep that, like just by pulling back against it. You'll see by doing the crossover, which we'll talk about, he manages to recover. But then as a counter, Dave has then thrown that crossover leg across. And now you can see, if with Ari's legs facing this way, if he was to turn his upper body, he'd be exposing a big gap. But instead, he brings his head towards his legs, and that allows him to recover. And you'll see that again here. The leg gets thrown, and he brings his head towards, in between his legs, so that he doesn't give up that space, instead of trying to face while the legs face away.
One very important principle is trying to have like opposing legs. So you have one, obviously we want our knees tight. It doesn't mean our heel can't move away from our butt. That's different. It's still my knee coming tight towards my chest or my shoulder. But having one leg high and one leg low like this. So the reason why is, if I can talk about just having them both in the same kind of line at first, Ari can kind of just use the same, you can kind of get the same grips and control both legs at once quite easily. And then now, if I try to bring my feet in front, you can see my legs are blocked. I'm going to have a difficult time. If instead, for example, or if he even goes for that, and I was to lift one leg high and one leg low, now he's got a different problem he has to deal with each leg. Okay, the way that he clears this particular positioning will be quite different to how he's going to deal with my leg being low. And we're going to use this from a bunch of different scenarios. Often as someone, for example, then Ari started to deal with one. As he did that, I changed. The other one's gone high and low. And now he has to go and change his attack. He might move around towards north-south. We're in this position, and we do a similar thing. One leg's coming high, one's low, and that makes it difficult for our opponent to control our feet. On another level, you can also be making them not sure which guard pass to do, because any single one might not be good. For example, with my leg up, or with both feet up, like of course, Ari can go underneath the legs and stack me. But with one up and one low, if he tries to stack, my inside leg is ready to push and recover that. And at the same time, with both low, he could Toreando around and go around the legs. But if we go back, if this one's up and he tries to walk around this leg, you see that's still in the way. It's still blocking him pretty much throughout, and he's going to allow me to recover. Another good example of this is Ari's ability to turn my hips to the side. So you can see, just first, my both feet are here. Ari's got a good push to turn with both arms here. Like both legs are being pushed in the same way, and that's quite strong. If I was to put one leg up high here, look at this grip. It's just not a good angle to try to push and turn my hips at all. Okay, with that arm, it's actually quite a weak action, and therefore by having only one leg to push on, I can start to pummel and fight against something like that a lot easier. Obviously, this is an active thing. We don't just sit here like this and think we're okay. We're constantly, as someone's moving one, we're moving the other, but it's very rarely chasing our opponent with 2 feet like this, where it's easy to block and parry. It's often one leg coming high or the other leg coming high, making it very difficult for Ari to track and follow my legs.
I guess another thing to add is when you have the legs in that position, I'll just get you to go up. When I use this position here, initially, if I have my legs like this and you start to redirect to this side, obviously it's very easy for you to do that. The second I lift this leg up and I start to turn my foot in, now even if you continue trying to redirect, and even if you start to redirect, I can start to turn my foot to face you, kind of use it like a crossover kind of motion or high cover.
Just clarifying with that you want the knees often like flared when you're doing this. It's not knees like straight up and down like this. It's kind of flared, and we're working on these kind of oblique plane.
When the knees start to point inwards as well, it's a lot easier for the guard passer to start to push your feet to the floor, which is essentially the opposite of what the guard player wants to do.
One important thing about having your legs in alternate planes, and also about having enough flexibility to bring your foot past the line of where your the small of your back is on the ground, so your rotation point, is my ability to spin. So if you look here, I've got if I had an opponent, which was the wall right now, and I push against the wall with my leg, you can see my hips will spin away and my head towards, okay? Which could be a good action or that could be bad. Maybe I'm spinning myself towards north-south by doing that. When you have the flexibility to bring your foot past that plane, so now if you look at the angle of rotation is where my foot is where my small of my back is on the ground. If I bring it past that plane, now if I push into the wall with that foot, it's actually going to spin me the other way to square up with the opponent. Okay, so we can manipulate which way we're turning by whether our leg is low and we push out, or whether our leg is high and we push out. I can't really demonstrate this on the wall, but also if you could pull, if you've got a hook with your leg, it would pull my hips back in here, and if I could hook here, it would actually pull my hips the other way. Okay, so considering this, really try to develop the ability, whether it's flexibility or whether you have to be able to roll your hips back, to be able to get your foot past that line will allow you to turn your hips in multiple directions.
So this is a mistake that I made at first when I started working this style of guard retention. And you'll see in this clip, I do a good job of retaining my guard still, but you'll see I end up on the defense a lot more than I should be. We're doing a drill where my aim is just to retain guard, not to use any grips, but just retain guard at my opponent's trying to pass. And you can see I'm getting put out of position a fair bit, and I'm able to recover, but to make this a lot harder, I need to have my feet in different planes. Look here, they've got both shins in the same plane. So when my opponent is able to get grips, he's able to then use both feet to turn me. Now I'm in a bad angle and on the back foot. If instead, for example, here I had one leg high and the other one low, chopped in, this leg would be ready to pummel and kick away. Okay, so you're going to see, I'll show some footage of Ari. I've obviously changed my postures a lot since, but you'll see some footage of Ari and how he's using his legs in different planes and how much harder that makes it to get into good position. Okay, so this could be a mistake you were making, having both feet in the same alignment like this. Let's immediately look at the way Ari is pummeling his legs and he'll have one leg high and one leg low. And another thing about this is it's not even just in the pure forward and back planes, often he'll have one leg cut across sideways as well to make the planes even more pronounced. Okay, so if you have a look in a moment. There we are. Okay, so now he's getting quite a diagonal plane. As I try to step over this leg, the other leg has changed angle and he's ready to kick me away. Okay, so as I start trying to squash that leg, I realize it's going to be a futile attempt unless I can get underneath that top leg. Okay, and then he uses that top leg to recover his bottom leg. Again, he's changed planes here, and it's very difficult to control both legs. You can control one, it kind of lets you control one leg, but in controlling one leg, the other one is there ready to kick away. And if the other one can make space and frame, then it really resets you back. So again, look here, I've gone under one leg, but at the same time, because this other leg is tucked, he's now fed that underneath my body. So I have to worry about risk of triangles here, and it becomes very difficult to actually work an under the legs pass while this bottom leg is still trapped in front. I'd like both legs underneath, ideally.
This topic, we're looking at the elbow on the ground principle. So we can use the elbow on the ground to move ourselves when we're playing guard. We can also use the elbow on the ground as a frame. So a lot of the time people, when they think about frames, especially from what we've mentioned so far in this instructional, is solely about using our hands and our feet to frame our opponent. But you can also use the frames to obviously frame the floor and also frame a part of your body. So the first elbow on the ground frame we'll use is simply just to stop our legs getting redirected. So if Lockie pushes my left knee to the floor and I'm not framing, maybe I'm framing Lockie's shoulders, my legs are still going to get redirected and pushed to the floor. If I maintain just one frame on the shoulder and I keep this elbow on the floor and I connect my hand to my knee, now when he goes to push my leg to the floor, he can't because of this elbow to ground connection.
I can point out as well, often you don't,
it's extra support holding your own leg, but often just putting your elbow there and I push, even if I'm pushing both legs, will be enough to help with that too.
Yeah. For movement, using the elbow on the ground principle, we can take our hips towards our elbow by closing an already opened elbow. We can also take our hips away from our elbow by opening a closed elbow.
So I think a key takeaway from the elbow positioning thing is we've been talking about frames so much, and we don't want people to just be reaching with their hands all the time and keeping like this. It's actually very hard to move if you're doing that. A lot of the time, one of our elbows is going to be on the ground while the other is framing.
This was talked about earlier, but just having the elbows on the ground, really, it's like it's weird, but you almost on bottom want some base. Like if you've got a good wide base, it prevents you from being turned. If you're very narrow, you can be tilted and your hips can be tilted to the left or the right. By placing an elbow on the ground, that prevents your hips from being turned. And you can see Ari supporting his leg, preventing his hips being rolled towards the side of the cursor here. And this is really common, and I think it's an area that people are often not aware of, and it makes a huge difference to your ability to retain guard and maintain yourself from being turned away from your opponent, so you can continue to either face them or at least not face away. Okay, so again, elbow to the ground. You can see there it's helping Ari with his movement, as well as for preventing me from being able to tilt him to the side.
So general rule, when you feel like you've lost the battle for frames, so we're getting like pretty desperate to retain our guard now, you've got two options. You either try to turn in towards your opponent and try to attach to their legs with your hands, or you turn away and try to roll out, or potentially expose your back but roll away and risk that. Okay, so the first is going to be the best option, but the worst thing, I guess, in this case is just getting your guard past, and then you've lost position and you're now in a bad spot. So it's often worth taking the risk of turning in or away. So as I said, we might have frames, and then this is, for just about every guard passing scenario. It could be through, around, or under the legs. Once I realize that Ari's too close to passing and my frames are kind of collapsed here, I'm going to try to turn in at first and try to attach to the legs. Okay, and that might be just enough to kind of pull back and get my legs engaged again and start to build frames, or I might be able to scramble to my feet and escape. The other strategic thing to be aware of is sometimes your opponent's turned you away, and you can see here I've lost my frames, but I've also lost my chance to turn in. In a scenario like that, we'll often start to turn our back turtle and try to fight out of the turtle position without our back being taken, with assuming that we're in a rule set or a mindset that getting your guard past is a worse thing than potentially risking someone going for your back.